What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with NIO, Tesla, SPY, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what data is coming out for tomorrow as we have the PPI report coming out. Not to mention some very important things that Jerome Powell said today, which are super, super huge for the markets as he was being a bit more hawkish. So I'm going to break down some things Powell has said, what's going on with the markets and the charts, what you should be watching for Tesla, SPY, NIO, and all these other tickers. But before I break into Devil's information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention that I am not a financial planner. Make sure you take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, deposit $500, you're guaranteed 20 free stocks. And the offer ends very soon, in just about a week from now. Anyways, for NIO, we have an inverse cup and handle structure that is developing, and we're on a bit of a downtrend right here as we have this gap to fill. So NIO is still looking a bit more bearish, at least for the short term to me. However, for the long term, like I said earlier, I'm still a big bull for NIO. I think NIO will run very, very nicely for the longer term. So I'm going to clarify this and kind of break down more details about this. But what happened to the market? That's the big question on a lot of people's minds. Why did the market push to new all-time highs and end up getting a little bit of a rejection, kind of coming back down later on? Let me talk about what actually happened. So, as a reminder and a quick recap, we had the CPI data come out in the morning before the market ended up opening. Everything was close to, if not below, expectations. Core was at 0.2% month over month, below expectations. Year over year, it was at 3.4% below expectations. Month over month, 0% for all items CPI. That's below expectations. And finally, same thing with year over year, 3.3% below expectations again. So, you guys can see the trend on CPI is now in the downwards direction as of right now. And this is actually a good sign. The market did rally once this came out. Do I fully trust this data? The answer is not necessarily. I can't really say that. But what I can say is that we have to just go based off the data from what we're seeing right here. But overall, the market did continue to push when this came out. SPY broke all-time highs. We even saw other tickers like Tesla push very nicely in the QQQ because the market was very, very excited about this data. It held up very, very nicely. However, as time went on, we ended up getting the Fed's economic projections, and things were not that great because the Fed is now expecting to possibly hold rates up for longer than expected, not really give us as many cuts as the market initially thought. They're now projecting only one cut for the year, and despite the good data that we got, Jerome Powell had a lot to say about that today. So Powell was speaking. He said some very important things. Once again, they kept rates the same. We're still expecting them to actually keep rates the same again in the next July meeting. So that's what the Fed is kind of like anticipating for now. When Jerome Powell was speaking, he said the Fed is not ready to cut rates yet, and there still is a lot of work to be done. He mentioned that, yes, there's been a lot of progress to fighting inflation. He's very, very happy about that so far, but he can't become too complacent, and the Fed cannot cut rates prematurely. He mentioned that so far, the Fed's policy needs to remain sufficiently restrictive. There's more work that has to be done to bring inflation down to their targets, and they're not really comfortable at cutting rates just yet. And they need a lot more confidence to build up for that to end up happening. And that's because of the fact that if you look at the previous year's data, we were in a phase where we ended up seeing inflation kind of like at a higher level. So with inflation going up, the data is going to look a lot better year over year. And he's mentioning that we have to be very careful with all this coming out. He also mentioned that the Fed is in no position yet to cut. They need to give it more time. And when asked specific questions about the effects on the economy and such, he didn't really give very, very specific answers. He was very vague, if anything. He also mentioned that they're going to continue to kind of look at the data. He also said he has no definite answer as to why Americans kind of view the economy negatively. So he gave very, very ambiguous answers to most of the questions he was asked, but he made it very clear the Fed has to remain restrictive, possibly keep rates higher for longer than they initially expected. And despite the fact that this is all going on, they're not going to raise rates. There's no plan to do that. It's more like they're just going to keep rates the same for longer and then wait and see what happens with inflation. They have to give this more time. So that's pretty much all he said, just the same speech he typically gives. He was a bit more hawkish than dovish, and he said that policy must remain restrictive just to bring things down. He also mentioned that the Fed is in a very, very critical position where they don't want to, kind of misread the situation. That's the reason why they're giving it the time that they need. And he's doing this as a result of what we've seen from, previous mistakes by the Fed. So that's what Powell said. He gave pretty much the same speech as before. He didn't really change too much, but that's going to be very important for the markets moving forward. The fear and greed index is currently at neutral. The market's not too fearful, not too greedy. We're at extreme greed as of right now. And then we also have the puts and call option positioning at extreme greed as we're starting to see more and more of these puts being closed. But the last time we saw this ratio down here, we did see a little drop in the markets. So we'll see if the same thing happens or not. The VIX is also dipping a bit as it's becoming more neutral, so we'll see how all of this changes. For NIO, there's been a lot of talk about the EU tariffs. There has been an investigation on NIO quite yet. That hasn't happened yet, but there have been some investigations on Chinese EV subsidies, at least in October. And as a result, as part of the investigation, the commission concluded that the EVs made in China benefit unfairly from these subsidies. As a result, they're once again maintaining these high tariffs. So you guys could see the new tariffs, at least that have been reached out so far, would make the additional tariffs include a 17% mark on BYD, many of the other Chinese EVs. Now, for others out there, we're not too sure about what's going on with NIO quite yet. We're waiting to see if there's any investigation. So we'll see. But nonetheless, NIO might end up getting involved in all of this. Unfortunately, it's going to still affect them, but that is nothing that would be too surprising as BYD is already being affected. So that's something else I just want to note. The Chinese tariffs are going to likely be coming from the EU, so we'll see how things end up developing. Also, Bank of America Securities maintains a neutral rating. Price-price ratio is dipping because NIO is losing some strength. And also, we tend to screen only about 50% of the time on Thursdays, nothing too crazy. There's more volatility around 1 o'clock p.m. and also during the final hour of the day. And then the last thing about NIO is the fact that the volume is only at about 62 million. So it's still kind of flat, but a little bit on the downside. So what do I see for the charts? What do I see for NIO in the market going forward? Guys, like I said earlier, okay, we had a double top leg structure on NIO, forming an inverted cup and handle like structure. For the short term, I think that there is more downside potential. We kind of pumped it a bit only to dump again, and we might come down to fill this gap in the lower fours. So I anticipate that for the short term. Okay, but for NIO as a whole, for NIO as a company fundamentally, I'm still a big bull. I'm very, very excited for the long term, and I think there's a lot more upside coming later on, especially as we get into like the next quarter, considering the fact that they're going to be looking at record deliveries and very, very strong looking numbers, in my opinion, that will help improve their margins, in my personal opinion, too. So we'll see. But for the short term, I wouldn't be surprised if we get a big reaction. Oh, I forgot to mention one more thing. Tomorrow, it's going to be Thursday, June 13th, 2024. Right before the market opens, we have the PPI data report and initial jobless claims. PPI is going to be very important for understanding how inflation is looking, at least for the next month. And we'll see if things are in line with expectations or not. So that's going to be very, very important. But we'll see how PPI goes. This tends to be a leading indicator for CPI, and that's going to be very, very important for how things end up developing. With that being said, guys, NIO does have downside to fill this gap. I think it might kind of pop a bit, retest 4.6 before it comes back down a little lower. But then once we fill the gap, we could be looking for a bounce, but there's still some short-term downside. For Tesla, Tesla's back within its range, forming a nice little bounce, and we have a double bottom that's forming here. So I see potential upside coming to Tesla. For now, it really depends if we could hold up. Let me just note that tomorrow we have the shareholder vote for Tesla, so it's going to likely be a big move. And when you zoom out all the way, there's still a nice inverse head and shoulders that is developing, which does suggest upside is a strong possibility. So tomorrow we'll be watching 180 as resistance, also 173 is our key support. I think that we're still within this range, but there is upside potential for the stock on the 4-hour. Volume is starting to build up, and I think tomorrow we're going to see some more upside. I think there's going to be some excitement approaching the shareholder vote, and then once the vote is out, we'll see a big move. So I think that Tesla's technicals do favor the upside a bit more, as we have a nice inverse head and shoulders and more potential. Now, for SPY, on the other hand, although this pumped very, very nicely, there might be another pop thanks to PPI, so we could retest the high again. But I think that we're either going to see some range-bound price action within the intraday range from today, where we kind of pop and drop and kind of trade sideways, or if we lose 540, there could be a dip coming down to fill this gap all the way down to 537, because the daily chart is not looking that strong on SPY. If you guys look at this very carefully, you will see we kind of rejected right over here, and we have this huge gap to fill below now, and we kind of got a small rejection today. So I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow we get a little pop thanks to PPI and we continue lower. If we might just either trade sideways between 544 and 542, but if we lose 540, there's going to be a risk of us coming down to 537 to fill the gap. I'll be watching to see if that ends up being the case, so watch that very carefully. For Nvidia, got a big wick and a rejection. We're still kind of trading sideways right over here. I'm going to actually pull up the 4-hour time frame just to show you guys something else. The 4-hour is still climbing very, very nicely. We're actually showing some strength. Tomorrow, we could actually retest this support right over here at 124.5. If we hold above that, we could try to rebound and continue to push towards 128. If we lose that, we could be dipping back down towards 122. That's very close to where our 20 EMA happens to be. So tomorrow, look for a little dip and then a potential push to the upside towards 128. Nvidia definitely has potential. For Bitcoin, we're actually looking pretty good right now. We're going to be looking for a push towards 69,000. Overall, we'll have to see if that holds that support. We're actually kind of range bound right now on Bitcoin. So watch support at 66,000, watch resistance at 69,000. I think we're going to continue to trade sideways. Look for a little push tomorrow morning towards 69,000, and we'll see if we get a rejection or not. But I do believe there's going to be a little pop in and possibly a drop. For the QQQ, not Coinbase. QQQ, we're looking more bullish overall. We're actually outperforming SPY a bit, so there is potential for us to continue to push thanks to Apple. If we continue to push, we'll be looking at 477.5 as resistance. If that breaks, look for 480. I think it might go a little higher before we try to see some kind of like tightening. So I think we could be approaching 478 and then start to trade sideways once we get that push. So look for a little bit more upside, then some sideways price action up here, and then we might see this thing form a temporary top before it starts to come back down. Apple pushed all the way up to about 220. Now it kind of came back down after Jerome Powell gave his very important speech. So that was very important for how the market ended up moving. As you guys can see, Apple's still holding up very, very well. I'll be looking at support right here at 212.5. If we lose that, look for 210. If we break through this, we'll be looking for 216. As of right now, I might rebound a bit, then come back down and just continue to consolidate. I see that as a strong possibility for tomorrow. For a few more, Coinbase trying to push up higher. We're going to likely fluctuate a bit. I could be looking for a test of 260, so we'll see if anything changes. If we continue to pump on Amazon, I'll be careful. I think we're going to be testing 185 as support, so we'll see if that breaks or not. For Meta, we're on a very, very nice uptrend right over here. I'll be looking for a test of support. We kind of popped and dropped today, so I'm seeing some weakness simultaneously. So despite the uptrend, we could actually come down just a bit to retest this imbalance. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually dip towards 500 and try to bounce off that again. So I see a little dip coming to Meta. For GameStop, it's kind of dipping a bit. It failed to get a hold above 30. So watch support currently at 25 and then 22. I think it might be testing those supports before it tries to bounce again. So it's going to likely consolidate within a range for now. To be bullish, you want to see it close above 30 and hold it. It hasn't done that yet, so we have to give it some time. AMC is no different. Watch 4.91. If we lose this, we'll be dipping all the way back down to the imbalance at 4.68. So I'm seeing some weakness, and there might be a little dip coming as you have like a head and shoulders here. So there might be some downside for AMC temporarily. So we'll give it some time. With that being said, for NIO, I anticipate that NIO might see a little downside for the short term. We still have that gap to fill in the low fours. So I think we're going to likely see that dip. A little pop and drop is very probable for this gap fill towards 4.2. Then we should get a bounce after that. So we'll see how things go. But with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day, guys. And I'll see you guys very soon on the next one tomorrow. Get ready for more data. First off, the market may continue to react to what Jerome Powell said today. Then we also have the PPI data report and initial jobless claims coming out tomorrow morning. So we'll see what this causes for the market. I'll be very open-minded depending on what happens, but just know that the market is in a tight area where resistance is getting tougher. So we'll see if we get a rejection or not. My best bet would be the market kind of like shuffles a bit before we see any possible rejection. Just a temporary one. It's not like it's going to last forever. And then for NIO, we might see some downside temporarily, but I'm still a big bull long term. All right. Thank you for listening. Have a great day, guys, and peace out.